when you go to family parties.
Yeah.
And
what's going on?
when are you getting married?
Yeah.
When are you having kids?
I just exposed myself, but it's okay. You guys can fill in the blanks. Before moving in with my partner, I would like to be married. It's fine.
This would have been hard to film without talking about it.
Would you rather take your time and find the person who you feel the most confident and comfortable with? Or is it just kind of like, you get to an age and it's kind of like musical chairs and the music stops and you just like, oh my God, I just need to grab someone who's close to me and like make it work?
Yeah.
Because the clock is ticking, your body is changing and all these things. Hello and welcome back to Voice Hugs, a podcast on becoming your best self, embracing all seasons of life with open arms. This is your host, Viv and Ro.
Hi.
So today, something that's been percolating in both of our brains. Percolating is societal expectations when you get older. The next two episodes are going to both be kind of about age a little. It just happened that way. It's just what, we've been thinking about. When we're in our 20s, I think we still have this pass in life. You're old enough to be an adult, quote unquote adult, but you're still young enough to kind of live your life and be a little reckless, if you will, or just not have to worry too much about responsibilities. But as you start entering your 30s, I think that's when things get a bit more serious. And I think that turning point, at least for me and most of my friends, from 29 to 30 is like, whoa. Nothing really changes, right? But I think it's just this age of like, whoa, we're entering our 30s, and it makes you very reflective of, how did I live my 20s? Am I where I expected myself to be? Am I where society expects me to be? Am I where my parents expect me to be? So let's spend an episode talking about that, because I think whether it's motherhood, whether it is having kids, whether it is where we are in our career, whether it is how we are mentally,
marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something about turning 30, like when I think about the age 30, it feels like there's a lot of pressure in you have to have certain things figured out by the time you're 30. But 30 is just an age. And like right now I'm thinking about 40, right? And I don't really have expectations for 40. Something about 30 feels so much bigger, or perhaps it's because 40 feels so far away.
Yeah.
Those three things that you mentioned, marriage, kids, and career, I think in our 20s, those things are in our minds, but the pressure is very, very different than a couple years into 30 now, and we're feeling very different about all three things. Or at least I have felt.
Yes.
Yeah.
The thing is, you don't talk about these things in your 20s because it's so far away and it's irrelevant to your life, right? But now this is all we talk about.
It kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like that way.
Yeah, like all our friends are married or have gotten married. People are starting to have kids. So then you start talking about kids and people start asking when you're going to have kids. And then, if anything, career is one thing that everyone's kind of like, meh, like you do you. You got money, you good? Okay, great. How's like your wife, or like how's your husband, or how's like your kid? So before we dive into this episode, we usually say this at the end. Viv had a really great suggestion to say it much earlier. So if you've been enjoying this podcast, it would mean a lot to us if you can give us a thumbs up if it's on YouTube, or leave us a comment on whatever platform you're on, especially YouTube and Spotify. And also, if you haven't already, you can give us a little review on wherever you listen to podcasts. It'd mean a lot and it'd help us reach even more people, and that's really the essence of Voice Hugs. We just want to spread more hugs
all around the world.
Yes.
Thank you guys. All right. Okay. So let's start. Let's rewind back a few years.
Okay.
We are 32 now.
Yes.
I feel weird revealing my age, even though it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We are 32, so a couple of years into 30. Let's rewind a little bit back to before we turned 30, and we'll start with marriage. Entering our 30s, we were both not married.
Were we in relationships at least? We were,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes.
But we weren't married.
We weren't married. I do remember thinking, should I be married by now? That was definitely a question that came to mind. So, yes, can you share what were your ideas and thoughts of marriage entering your 30s, and how has that shifted now?
The perfect timeline, I think, for most women these days, or a lot of my friends too, the magic number in your head it was 28. Like 28 just sounded like a great number to be married by, right? Because it's like, oh, you meet when you're 26, you date for 2 years, you do the thing, you get to know each other. By 28, you get married, and then, maybe around like 29, 30, you start thinking about kids. But you have time to enjoy married life. So that was the ideal timeline. So by the time that 29 was already here and 30 was approaching, I was like, well, I'm not married yet. And then I think it's like, I know we're focusing on marriage right now, but then when you are thinking about this, you can't help but think about, okay, well, I'm not married. I don't have a house. I don't have a car. I don't have all of these things that you haven't checked off yet just kind of gets lumped together. I think as humans, it's also easier to focus on all the things that you don't have, especially if it's like these societal expectations of like, you need to have all of these things by this time. I think I was definitely I was in a very stable relationship. I knew we were end game. At the same time, I was just like, hurry, I'm not getting younger. Excuse me, why are you just
ticking?
Yeah, why are you just taking your sweet time?
Okay, what is the difference for you between getting married then and you already know you're in it for the long haul? This is your end game. What was the pressure in getting married, signing papers, being life partners officially?
Because I think I obviously grew up just doing whatever I wanted to do in my life, right? Not a care in the world. Whatever my parents want, I didn't care. But as I got older and I think grew more into myself and my values and the person that I want to be, my one thing was, before moving in with my partner, I just exposed myself, but it's okay. You guys can fill in the blanks. Before moving in with my partner, I would like to be married. It's fine.
This would have been hard to film without talking about it.
That's fine. We'll move on. And so that to me was like I'm not gonna just move in with a boyfriend. Even with a fiance, I think my parents, I don't know if they would have. I think they would have been chill at this point in our lives. They know we're serious too. But even then, for me, I was like, I just want to make sure whoever I'm moving in with, it's the person that I'm gonna be with for the rest of my life. So I think that was not necessary. It was meaningful to me because it kind of would help us figure out the next steps. Even though we knew we were going to be together, even though we, all these things would happen, to me it was important that things kind of happen the right order, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and then that, and then one thing will eventually lead to another. You can't, to me, that was the turning point of, you do this and then things will follow.
I can understand that. And I think in some ways, that's how my mind works too. It's kind of like a promise to commit to each other. And so if that's the end game, I want to make sure that we're on the same page and that we're both in it before we take the next steps of the next
whatever
steps.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think growing up, regardless if I was wild or not, I've always believed marriage is a very special thing between two people that you will hopefully commit to for the rest of your life. And so that is why, to me, it's a pretty big deal, because sure, nothing changes besides you signing a piece of paper, but it's the implication and the meaning and the intention. And I think we talk about intention all the time, right? Voice hugs, intention goes hand in hand. So I think that intention of committing yourself for the rest of your life, again, hopefully, ideally.
That's so interesting to me because I too wanted to be married by 28. I don't know where this number came from, but like,
it's just like, it seems like a good number. It seems like not too young, not too old. It's like the porridge that's just right.
Yeah. And then I wanted to either be pregnant or have my first kid by 30. And because I wanted more than one kid, then I'd have opportunities to have more if I could, like earlier than later. With that being said, I think now when I look back to my 20s and what my idea of marriage was then versus how I think about it now, marriage, having kids, having a house, being in your career even, those are all external things that I wanted. I still want those things, but I think the biggest difference between how I understand those things then versus now is that now I feel a little bit more in tune with what I need versus what I want. You might want a marriage and you're in it and you're so unhappy because you don't know what you need from a marriage. You might want a house, but you don't know how to manage a house. You don't know how to like financially plan and like prepare for those things because you don't know what your needs are.
And the crazy thing is we're getting to an age where some of our friends who did get married earlier or who did check off some of these boxes earlier
are divorced.
Now, or like super unhappy or like the house is just way too overwhelming or, whatever have you.
Yeah. So I think just going back to the marriage topic, since we're on that one, marriage is also like a really big deal for me. I've always seen myself getting married, and I think there's something very special about committing to someone long term and growing old together and going through the ups and downs together. I didn't realize until preparing for this episode that I'm actually very, very afraid of commitment in that way.
Oh, tell us more.
Yeah, like I'm always like, when am I gonna get married? I think I'm very scared of getting married and committing like life with someone else because I don't know, maybe it's because like growing up with divorced parents, because they divorced when I was so young, and now as an adult I understand the difference between a marriage not working out and being co-parents. All of that kind of bled together in my mind growing up. I always thought like, oh, divorce equals broken family equals, the child is the one that suffers from it, which kids do. They are impacted by divorce. But I think because that hasn't been fully processed in my mind, I'm so scared of messing up. There's a lot of fear in, I don't know, like when I really, really think about it, I'm like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like you divorce and you move on and, life goes on and I think things will be okay. But there's a lot of fear, I think, when it comes to marriage now. And that's why there's also not a huge rush for me. Like differently than you, I would not get married before moving in because that's so scary
you
to me.
You just want to make sure.
That's just so scary to me. Like, what if I commit to someone and I'm like, I don't like living with you. Like, this is actually not what I imagined at all.
You give me the ick.
Yeah. But I can see it both ways. I really can. That's just how I viewed it then versus now. Before, there was a lot more pressure in getting married by a certain time. But now that I'm past that time, I'm okay where I am.
I think this opens up an interesting little pathway segue about the right person versus the quote unquote right time. And then not necessarily like right person, right time, but just like, would you rather take your time and find the person who you feel the most confident and comfortable with and that you can see life with them through? Or is it just kind of like, this is an analogy that a lot of articles and people make, right? It's like, you get to an age and it's kind of like musical chairs and the music stops and you just like, oh my God, I just need to grab someone who's close to me and like kind of make it work.
Yeah.
Because the clock is ticking, your body is changing and all these things. And so I think from that perspective, it's like another way to view this too, of like at the end of the day, it's really what you care about the most. And I think especially if you were impacted, to say lightly, by your parents splitting, like you would be like a lot more intentional with how you approach this and like a lot more, I don't know if cautious is the right word.
No,
but like careful.
I am definitely very cautious when it comes to big life events. And I think that's why I also make very spontaneous decisions sometimes, because it's kind of like analysis paralysis by analysis. That's where I get stuck in. But something that you shared earlier that reminded me of being in our 30s too. In your 20s, you have lots of opportunities to date around, and if a relationship doesn't work out, you still have time on your hands.
Oh yeah,
right?
and you're placed in environments where it's easy to meet people.
I mean, this is not from my experience, but I know that I have friends where they're afraid to leave a relationship because it feels like you have to start over. And dating is tough in your 30s, I think. I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine that it's different than your 20s, where because everyone is a little bit more sure of themselves, in some ways, it's harder to find someone that fits your life because your life is more settled in. Versus in your 20s, there's a lot of like growing together. And if you're already in a relationship, it's like balancing the two lives together. I don't know where I was going with that, but that's definitely something that I think is different. There's more pressure in your 30s to try to make something work, or really, really thinking about what you want and how you want your path to go in the next couple of years.
Adding on top of that and kind of going also back to what you're optimizing for and what you're looking for. I don't know if this statement holds true to you. Before you started dating your current mans, and then also me before I started dating my current mans, when you thought about spending the rest of your life on your own, how did that make you feel?
I'm okay.
If you were to, yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's like, see, this is where I have a hard time. I don't know if that's a coping mechanism where it's like, oh, I'm fine on my own.
No, but I genuinely felt like you would have been fine.
Yeah. And I think same with you.
Yeah.
And maybe because we were already in that headspace, I don't feel the pressure to get married, like to be married, because I'm happy in my long-term committed relationship. And I know that I'm still on my own journey of figuring out what marriage means to me, and that's okay. But in my 20s, that would not have been what I was thinking. I'm like, oh gosh, I need to time this. I need to have a boyfriend by tomorrow so that we can date for 2 years, and then he can propose and we can be engaged for 6 months, and that's enough time to plan our wedding. And then when a wedding happens, then we can spend a year being newlyweds, and then after that 1 year we can start trying to have kids. We'll give a buffer of 1 year, 2 years in case we aren't able to have kids, and then our kid will be born. You know, like that's literally how I was thinking in my 20s. And that in no part of that thought process did I ask myself, what do I need? How do I
from
feel?
Said man?
Yeah. Do I feel prepared for it? And I think that's what has changed so much as you get older. You're just a little bit more in tune with yourself, and so it makes all of those things more real in some ways and more possible, but also like just so much more real. I don't know, it's kind of scary.
Do you feel like having those expectations for yourself and how your life quote unquote should play out impacted you when the relationship didn't work out back then in your 20s? Because you know how it's like you've thought of this life with this person and you had these expectations. Do you feel like those expectations made you like hang on to the relationship more than maybe you should have, or do you think it had like nothing to do? It was just what you wanted?
No, for sure. And I think that's what's kind of scary, right? Like looking back, because I was so fixated on wanting these external things, marriage, kids, family, a house, all of those things, I wanted to make something work in a previous relationship just to make it work, just so that like this timeline will pan out. And it wasn't until my last relationship didn't work out, I was like, whoa, I'm actually quite unhappy. Like if things did pan out that way, and I am so glad that it didn't, because I feel like I'm such a different person now, and I love myself so much more. It's scary that I would have held on to something in my earlier years just to get that thing.
Yeah, can relate. A little bit different context, but I think it doesn't matter if you're young or you're old, right? Like you can be so fixated on this one thing that has less to do with the person. I think for you, it may have been this like timeline and this like idealized version. For me, it was also a part of like the idealized version, or it's like I was so in love with the idea of this person. I was willing to put up with things that I definitely, like, you know me. I don't put up with stuff like that. I put up with so much in the sense that I was not true to myself.
Yes.
Like now that I look back, I'm like, who was I?
I definitely think being true to yourself is the theme in all of this, whether it's marriage or having kids or choosing the career path, or how much energy you put into these things, what all of these things means to you. Being true to yourself and understanding yourself is the number one thing in figuring out how to approach anything in your life.
Yeah, like even between the two of us, you are in the camp of must move in before getting married. I'm in the camp of must get married before moving in. And there really is no right and wrong with anything, right? I think the most important thing, as Viv just said, is just you need to know who you are and what you want and what you value, and stay as true to yourself as you can. The more that you're in tune with these needs and these, I guess, values or principles of yours, the better you're able to hopefully communicate that with the person that you meet. And then they will either be able to be like, I cannot meet you, maybe I can meet you halfway, or like, let's do it, right? And I think
the dance begins.
Yeah. I think it also helped me taking the time to just be by myself and not date for so long, and really coming to terms with the fact that if I do end up single for the rest of my life, I really will be okay with it. I think that really helped me talk to my current significant other when we first met of like, here's who I am, this is what I care about. I just want you to know earlier on that like these are some of the things that I will and won't do, including the moving in part, right? He was definitely in the camp of need to live together before getting married just to know what that's like. I think another thing is like we get in our heads of like, oh, but what if I tell this person this thing and they end up not liking it and they leave me, right? In my mind, I'm like, good.
Good riddance.
Yeah, because you want to make sure that whoever you're with, you're able to communicate with openly, and you guys can work through things like this together. And I think being able to work through things is probably one of the most important things that you can have. And we talk about this all the time in like the communications with partners and even with friendships. If you haven't seen either, we'll link it down below.
It's a banger episode. Before we continue with the episode, we want to drop in and share that our Voice Hug shop is now live. Our first launch, called the For All Seasons collection, includes 5 super cute greeting cards that can be sent to your besties throughout any season of their lives. I love writing cards as much as I love receiving them. There's something so meaningful about taking time out of our busy lives to reflect, put our thoughts onto paper, especially when it comes to expressing how much someone means to you and how grateful or proud you are of them. We designed the For All Seasons collection with that sentiment in mind. These cards are a great way to remind your loved ones that you are always in their corner, and we also hope they serve as a reminder to you of how amazing you are and that we're always rooting for you. With your help, let's spread more hugs around the world, one handwritten card at a time. You can find the collection on www.voicehugspodcast.com. Now back to the episode.
So that was our take on societal expectations for marriage. Next, let's talk about something fun. I think this is actually something a lot of women our age are struggling with or are grappling with very intensely, which is motherhood and kids. I'm just gonna slide career in there because in my mind, when I was thinking about this, it was like to be a mother or to have a career. Like in my mind, when I was like turning 30, it wasn't, oh, I can do both. Now it's like changed a little bit, but back then I was like, oh, I can only pick one because I knew like how committed I wanted to be as a mom. So let's talk about this. What did you think of when you thought about motherhood or like having kids when you're 29? You just wanted them.
I just wanted them.
She still wants them.
I still want them. I can't wait to have kids. I've wanted kids since I've said this before, but I've had baby fever since I was 5. So having kids is something that I knew for sure that I wanted. I think I want it even more than a marriage. And again, this goes back to my idea of marriage, I think, but we'll process that another day.
Yeah.
I think there is something that feels so unfair for us in our, like just us as women. Like we do have a biological clock. And I think that is the toughest toughest part, because in our 20s, and especially in the time that we grew up, right? I feel like in our 20s, there was a lot of stuff online about like being independent and being a girl boss and pursuing that career. Like you can do it as a girl now. It has been very empowering and encouraging, and I feel very lucky that we got to grow up in a time where our role wasn't just to become a mom and a wife. We got to explore our interests and become financially independent. So in that sense, I'm like thankful that we got to experience that as people. At the same time, I totally hear what you're saying, where once you enter your 30s, right, there is a constraint now. There is something that you have to consider and prepare for, which is your body, like your physical body. You might not be able to have kids. Your eggs might not be as healthy. You may be past your prime, and there is a prime when it comes to like physically having kids. That has been something that is definitely shifted when I think about having kids. Before it was like, oh, like I can't wait to have a little baby. I can't wait to take them to school and pack lunches for them.
The little bento boxes. Oh my God, I can totally see you as a bento mom.
Yeah, like I'm still so excited about those things, but now it becomes just so much more real. Like, how are we going to do this? Is it going to happen? What does that mean for career wise, right? When I think about my career now, like before I used to be like, oh, I want to promote, I want to make this much amount of money before 30, and then where's my career going to go? And I am actively choosing in my current job not to promote, because I don't want that pressure and I don't want that stress when I have kids. And that's a decision and like a choice that I feel like our partners don't have to consider when they're thinking when they're thinking about their career. Versus for me, I'm like, no, I do not want to be in that kind of a role, because I want to have the energy and the mental space to raise my kids in the next like 5-10 years.
And it's interesting because I remember in our 20s, if our friends were like, oh, you know, I just want to be comfortable and I don't want a promotion, I think we would
there would be judgment and shame. Like, oh, that's all you want? Like,
like you don't want more?
Okay, this totally reminds me. There was a period of time in my 20s where I truly wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I
remember this era.
Yeah, I just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to be a mom, and I didn't really like walk around broadcasting that, because it's like, oh, you went to college, you got an education, and you just want to be a mom.
Yes.
Yeah, and there was a lot of shame and I think judgment that I put on myself even. But now that I'm here, there is no shame or judgment for wanting that or choosing any life that you want, really. Like, I respect whatever life you want to choose for yourself. But yeah, it's just so interesting how easily influenced you are by society, by like culturally, right? Like the bubble that we grew up in, how that shapes what you want for yourself, instead of like really thinking, what is it that you need and what is it that you want?
Yeah. I remember seeing this thing. It may have just been a reel or like one of those talks that was reposted on a reel. But women were like, the biggest lie is for you to work throughout your 20s and 30s and to have kids later. Because I think really taking like the woman's body and physiology into consideration. This is just a story my aunt told me. She gave birth when she was in her early to mid 30s, and she had a big baby, like 11-pound baby that had to be C-section out of her. So she was recovering in the hospital, and next to her was this 18-year-old girl who just gave birth. She's putting on makeup, she's getting ready, doing her hair before her like husband comes and gets her. My aunt was just like, in that moment, it became so clear to her that age and like when you do have kids really does make a difference. And I think the older we get, even now without kids, I'm just tired. I don't even go out anymore. I don't even drink anymore. I don't even like pull all-nighters like we used to, but I'm just already so tired. So I can't imagine this plus kid, right? Versus like when we're in our 20s, we have like more energy. So anyway, I think there's just this like society's thing now. It's, you know, to work on your career, to do what you need to do so that you can be financially stable and ready for a kid. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But I think people are now starting to think like, maybe I would have wished to had kids when I was a little younger. And as they grow up, that's kind of when you can figure out what this like next career stage of your life could look like. Again, I get it. You know, a lot of times that's not the case. It's job market is hard, unemployment rate is super high. Like, you know, taking that all into consideration, once you've lived this one life, you can't help but think of, in an alternate universe, if things were to go a bit differently, what could that have looked like?
So when it comes to career and motherhood for you, I think a difference between us in our 20s too is that I feel like you're very career oriented. Like, I don't want, maybe career isn't the right word, but like you had a very strong purpose and there was a very definite like path that you wanted to go down to create and build something, which you did, right? And there was a lot of purpose there. Now that you're in your 30s and you've moved from New York to LA here and life has changed a bit, how do you feel about career in your 30s as it relates to motherhood as well?
I think there just came a point where, kind of going back to when you're entering this new decade in your life, it's just what you talk about. When you go out to grab brunch with friends, when you catch up, when you grab coffee, this is just what you're talking about. And I think one thing that does help is the more people that you talk to, especially women who have kind of gone through this before you, because like there's so many, you know, like our parents have gone through this before us, right? So just kind of hearing about, like, I would ask my mom, I would ask my friends, I would ask, you know, whoever that I'm hanging out with and seeing, I would just kind of pick their brain on how they navigated this kind of fork in the road. Because again, before, when I was just turning 30, it was one or the other, because my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was always present, even though when I was younger I didn't appreciate it and thought it was really annoying and just wished she wasn't home. But I think just having the constant presence and reliability and I guess security is something that I would hope that I could give to my kids too. And so from that perspective, it's like, oh, like, well, I can't do both. I think like the first person I talked to was my mom. My mom's like, you know, even with a newborn, they need you, but they don't need you 24/7. They're gonna take naps, and sure, you may be tired, but you will still have pockets of time for yourself. Maybe not as much as before you had kids, but you committed to having a kid, so that's just the life you chose, right? So I think her perspective helped me see this a little. And then I would remember growing up, my mom was like very into yoga, and then she would do that either like in the mornings or when we go to school. That gave me like, oh, it's possible. Amy Liu, the founder of Tower 28, an amazing beauty brand that I'm sure you guys probably all know about and have heard about. She was a beauty executive for I think 10-15 years, committed to like raising her kids for like 4 or 5 years, and then started Tower 28. And I think that is also another path where you could do one thing, realize that like, oh, maybe this isn't the right thing for me, or like maybe I'm too burnt out. Or I think, again, kind of going back to what we're all saying, is just taking a step back and asking yourself, like, what do I really want for myself? And maybe at that time in her life, I could totally see it being a case. We haven't really talked about this, but I could see like her wanting to focus on her family and making that a priority before she dives into like starting another venture. And she has said this, that those years that she had with her kids, she's so immensely grateful for it, and she wouldn't be the founder and the woman and just doing all the amazing things that she's doing today had she not had those years with her family. Taking a step back, it really is, our life is what we make of it. Society can tell you what to do and have expectations for you and judge you, but if we know in our gut, hey, I would actually be much happier if I just slow down during this season in my life, I can always ramp it back up because I trust myself enough. And I think that just last two sentences was just to answer your question of New York row versus LA row, of where kind of my priorities have been and where my headspace has been at. And I mean, you guys know, aside from podcast episodes and some reels here and there's been no YouTube videos, but YouTube videos are coming back. But yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at. And I think realizing that, like, really, we talk about seasons all the time, we talk about eras all the time. Like, I think I just had a really big realization even like a few nights ago, where before going to sleep, I looked up my significant other and I was just like, I love you so much. Like, I'm so lucky I get to do life with you. And, you know, there's like all these wonderful things ahead of us that we get to look forward to. If me moving back the first year or two is us solidifying our relationship and like set it on a good foundation for the rest of our lives, like that is something that I think it's worth my time. And like, you know, like I think when I first moved back, there's just, I've been public about this on the podcast and like on my channel of like, I feel lost. There was like a little bit of resentment in the beginning. Right now, like all of that we've like worked through. I've worked through all of that, and like, you know, we've also worked through all of that together. Of course, my partner's been like very supportive in helping me through all of this and super gentle and loving and all of that. It wasn't as positive of feelings in the beginning. And it took me a year and a half to get to a place where I was like, oh, yeah, it's just a season. And new seasons will be upon us. Like, hey, I'm taking care of myself now. I'm doing things that I wasn't able to do as much when I was in New York, which is just slowing down and making time for my partner. And we were doing long distance for the longest time too. That's kind of where I'm at now.
It reminds me of what, like full circle to the beginning where, you good? Full circle to the beginning of the episode where I said, you know, there's a lot of pressure when you turn 30, but in my mind, I don't think about 40 at all, right? And
I don't either.
Yeah, nobody talks about turning 40, 50, 60, 70, at least not that I'm aware of, or
maybe just none of us are there, so no one's talking about it.
Yeah, but I think that pressure of things panning out a certain way by the time you're 30, that is pressure that you don't need to have in your life. And I think like as you were sharing all of that, it reminded me that you can have everything that you want. You might just not have it all at the same time. And I think
I love that saying.
Yeah, like we're fed this idea that you can be a boss lady, you can be a mom, you can also relax and, you know, enjoy life, and you can do all of these things all at once. And, you know, you get to 22, 23, 24, 30, 31, 32, you're like, how come I don't have it all? How come I don't have all of these things? Instead of just embracing what is now and realizing like, hey, I'm in this season right now. How is this season going to impact the next season or the one after that? What do I want to enjoy in this season? What am I grateful for right now? And how can I take those baby steps to figure out what it is that I want? What is true to me? How can I be better at communicating, managing my emotions, just understanding yourself better? Because turning 30 or 33 next, it really doesn't matter what age that you're at. It's really just understanding where you are now, trying to figure it out and do the things that feel truest to you, because you know what, it might change the next year, like it might change the next month.
It really might.
Yeah. And so I hope that, you know, we have a lot of listeners who are between the ages of like 20 to 30. I'm excited for everyone.
Yeah.
Please share your journey with us. We would love to know what your thoughts are on marriage, on having kids, on pursuing your careers right now at the age that you're in, if you feel comfortable sharing your age, and what kind of societal pressures and expectations you feel has influenced those pillars in your life.
I think one thing I just realized that we didn't really touch about is like parents and their expectations or friends and expectations. But maybe that can be another episode, because that is, I know that's something that a lot of you guys have asked us about.
When you go to family parties and all the cousins and auntos and uncles
are just like, what's going on?
When are you getting married? Yeah. When are you having kids?
I think from the conversation that we just had, it may sound like we know exactly what we want, but we really don't. We're still navigating everything. And I think at the end of the day, the best thing that we could do is just to continually check in with ourselves. Maybe not every day, because we would be so tired, but you know, every once in a while. And I think this is why birthdays are so important, and we're going to talk about this more in the next episode. But every year I think is just a new year for you to reflect on how did the previous year go and what is coming next, and how may you want to or not want to change some things and other things not. And it's just, it's a beautiful thing that, like, I think it's a blessing that we get to choose. Yeah. And that we have the option to decide for ourselves.
Yeah.
And to think for ourselves.
Yes. Very grateful.
And with that,
with that, you can find us all over socials, wherever you listen to your podcast. We would love to hear from you. If you want to shoot us a DM or send us an email at voicehugspodcast, hello@voicehugspodcast.com. We also have a website with lots of cute greeting cards. Woohoo! If you'd like to support us, www.voicehugspodcast.com. Again, as we've shared in the beginning, it would mean so much to us if you can show your support, subscribe to our channel, follow us, all of that. Share our videos, comment, say hi. We love to hear from you. Yeah, so sending you all the biggest voice hug wherever you are in the world. Voice hugs!